Professional Development Presentation for Differential Instruction, presented by Kylie Kaiser. What is differential instruction? Differential instruction is an approach where a teacher can adjust their curriculum and instruction to maximize the learning in the classroom. And the learning in the classroom can also include your average learner, a student with English learning, students that are struggling, students with learning disabilities. Your students in your classroom also include your gifted and talented students. It's not a single strategy, it's a framework that teachers can use to implement a variety of strategies which often are evidence-based. First, we need to learn how teachers can differentiate instruction. The first step is the teacher needs to learn the readiness to the student's knowledge and skill level regarding content. Readiness includes or may vary on subject or content area, and different levels can be influenced by the student's background knowledge or life experience or previous learning. Some ways that teachers can determine these levels are by viewing academic records, examining results on standardized tests or units, and examining work samples. How teachers can differentiate instructions, and the next step is learning the interest on how the students learn, like what are their favorite topics or skills or activities. Teachers can easily gain this by asking their students what they like and don't like. Then have the students write a journal entry about themselves and have the students participate in icebreakers. Participating in icebreakers are key in learning how your students participate in activities. The next step is the learning profile, which is known as how a student learns new information or skills, which students learn either visually or hands-on. And teachers can obtain this information by observing the students during class or by a questionnaire. Also, obtaining the information, it is important to take note on how the students feel about themselves, such as if they feel successful learning something or what scares them away. There are 3 key differentiated instructional elements that teachers can use to meet the needs of all their students. First is knowing content. This element is the knowledge and skills students need to master. The next is the process, the activities students use to master the content. So the process could be if they learn hands-on or if they learn visually. The next one is the product, the method, the way the students use to demonstrate their learning. How can teachers prepare their students in their classroom for differentiated instruction? The very first step is to communicate with the students and parents. It is key in your students' learning and involving your parents and letting parents know how you are going to use a differentiated classroom approach. Like you need to tell the students and the parents how they are going to be challenged, how your role in the classroom is going to be different, such as you're going to use less teacher-led activities and more student-led activities, and how activities and projects are going to be assigned, and how tests will be used, such as evaluating students' learning, making instructional decisions, and providing feedback to the students and document process. It is important to give your students feedback. In order for your students to excel in the classroom, feedback is key. The next step to prepare your classroom for this instruction is to organize your classroom and think how the best way you are going to use out of your floor space. It's important to arrange your furniture, how your instruction is going to be provided. You wouldn't want your teacher desk in the middle of the classroom. You probably want it further away from the students and have the students' desk grouped together or close by. The next is how you are going to use your bulletin board and wall space. It's important for any key or helpful information you want your students to have access to, that it is in an organized and accessible location for all your students. The next thing you are going to want to do to your classroom is how you're going to store your materials for your students. Depending on how you are going to differentiate your instruction on how to use it, you are going to need to store materials close by for your students in an accessible spot for all your students, such as you're going to want more than one pencil sharpener, or have different racks for different pieces of paper for your students to get access to. The next thing is having a clear and set rules in your classroom so students know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. It is important to have set rules in your classroom and expectations so you're setting your students up for success and not failure. Such as if you are going to have your students work in small groups or pairs, it is important you have key rules as how you expect them to work together, such as you would want all students to participate and not have one or two do the entire activity. Then you need to set rules on how you want your noise level in your classroom or in a group, and how you expect your students to transition from one activity to the next, and how students manage their time. Such as you wouldn't want your students to be talking the entire time instead of participating in the activity. That is why it's important to monitor your kids or students at all times. And you need to have expectations on how you're going to have your students receive and turn in materials. What it's supposed to look like in your classroom is different for every teacher. The first thing that as a educator you need to decide is is what element you want to start with. Do you either want to change your content, how the students process the material, or the product? Then you want to select your subject area. What subject do you want to start with? Do you want to start with math? Do you want to start with science? Do you want to start with English? Then, if you teach more than one class, then pick the best class to start this with. that is going to work the easiest and cooperate the best. Then implement only one activity in a large unit or lesson instead of throwing your kids under the bus and splitting your, let's say you have 16 students in your classroom and you split them up in 4 groups, 4 students in each group. It's important to try it out first on a large amount to see how students react to the change. Then you need to assign homework for different groups of student based on each student's different readiness or interest or preferred way of learning. Then you need to provide support for your struggling readers or English learners or students with learning disabilities. It's key for a differentiated instruction that you have a backup plan to support your kids that struggle in the classroom. Next, you're going to want to use a simple means of gathering information about a student, such as an end of the chapter test or exit cards or surveys over the material. This is what to do and not to do and why. Some examples that are not differentiated practices are delivering instructions primary by lecturing and groups students at the beginning of the year based on the previous year test scores and giving bonus points in your classroom. The reasons why these are not differentiated practices are some students learn different. Some students may learn with you teaching in class and lecturing the entire time, but most of the time students learn either hands-on or visually. That is why it's important to have visuals and more hands-on activities because every student's different. That is why it's important to learn how each student learns. And then as an educator, you can not group each student from the previous year because students change even through the summer. They learn different and they grow in the classroom each year. That's why you cannot group each other based on the previous year. And then it is never okay to give bonus points in the classroom because it's important to think of all your students with even your students with learning disabilities or verbal disabilities. All students participate different in the classroom. So your expectations for giving bonus points may be different than a student that has learning disabilities. That's why it's important to have an equal system in your classroom. And as educators, it is key to be able to adapt to change and learning styles because every year you're going to get a different bunch of kids in the classroom that are going to be different every year. Instead of giving bonus points in the classroom, which students may feel they are bragging points, instead come up with a system or reward system that reaches all your kids in your classroom. And then instead of grouping your students by the previous year, try taking information at the beginning, middle, and end of the year to see how students learn and have changed throughout the year. And then another thing is at the beginning of the year, start out by having your students fill out a questionnaire or performing icebreakers. That's how you learn most about your students. And instead of delivering instruction by lecturing, try student-led activities. Let the students teach a lesson every once in a while and see how they react to it. And obviously monitor your students and take notes on how they are participating and reacting to this change. Thank you for watching.